welcome back to the podcast. Hey, welcome back to the Amazing Freedom Amazon Seller Podcast. This is Nate Slamans, joined by Andy Slamans, and we're really excited to announce the 6th season of the podcast. It's hard to believe, Andy, we've been doing the podcast now since late 2017, so it really has been 6 years off and on that we've been talking about selling on Amazon. And we've said for a while now, our goal is just to help everyday people become $1 million Amazon sellers. And that's why I'm really excited. We're just going to shake things up as we head into this next season of the show, where you're going to be interviewing Amazon sellers who have reached what we feel like is a high level of success. So that's what we can be looking forward. In between those episodes, we are still going to be giving updates on our brands and what we're doing. But to be honest, we're busier than ever, Andy. We're actually in the middle of several different acquisitions of potential businesses we're looking at buying, and there's just all kinds of great stuff going on. But tell us a little bit about these interviews you're going to be doing and what the listeners of the show can expect heading into season 6 of the podcast.
Yeah, so when I think about going back to 2014, when I first really became familiar with the internet, prior to that, I wasn't on social media very much. But when I started selling on Amazon, I realized the power that the internet was really bringing to the entire world. And I started sharing, and some of those very first times that I was sharing, I was interviewing other sellers in the Amazon seller space. And each interview that I did, I was extremely encouraged because it was everyday kind of people similar to myself who were literally selling millions of dollars on Amazon. And every interview that I did, I would pick up best practices. I would pick up tips. Again, we always talk about in the Amazon seller space, people are so friendly. They share so openly. And so those interviews, not only were they helping other people as other people were engaged, and we were on this platform called Spreecast that no longer exists, but there would be, 50, 100 people sometimes watching live. But every time I had my notepad and my pencil and I was taking notes, after those interviews, I would immediately have actionable content to go in and tweak my business. So I'm excited as we begin to interview people like Paul and Joe Miller, a husband and wife who, doing $4 million a year, or others that we've interviewed. I actually just interviewed Bradley Sutton, who is the chief evangelist for Helium 10. He was a phenomenal e-commerce seller, and now he's moved into the software services space for Amazon sellers. But just, he had so much insight and knowledge into understanding how to sell well on e-commerce. And then all the others that we have coming again that I think are great representation of, there's 8 million, I believe, third-party sellers on Amazon of just kind of everyday people who are creating fantastic side hustles as well as full-time income like you and I.
And Andy, you and I ask ourselves, sometimes we'll say like, hey, are we talking about arbitrage here? Are we talking about building brands? And to be honest, it's a little bit of both. And, you and I, our journey on Amazon has been a mixture of different selling models. We've kind of done it all. And actually, we're getting back to some of our roots where we are getting back into arbitrage, even where we're going to be in a business that's doing arbitrage. It's going to be probably a small part of our day to day, but we still see the cash flow opportunity there, as well as, we talk about our $10 million challenge this year and how we're projecting to reach over 10 million. So really, as we head into season 6, it's going to continue to be a little bit of all of it. But at the end of the day, it comes down to those Amazon success stories. And we feel like most sellers' journeys, people who get on Amazon and are successful, they do understand the entire ecosystem. They understand how to do it all. Maybe not everybody does every different selling model at some point, but they typically can gather some type of valuable information from other people that do. I know we've seen that in our business. We pick up a lot of tips from sellers at different levels and different models. We talked to people at a recent conference that do all kinds of different selling models, but we share a lot of the same practices when it comes to shipping and monitoring account health, all those practices. So we're going to see that heading to season 6. And if you are someone who's looking to become a $1 million seller, that's what we're going to try to do in these episodes every single week. Hey, we are back with another episode of the Amazing Freedom Amazon Seller Podcast. And this week we are talking all about relationships, specifically supplier relations. And Andy, this is interesting because just a few weeks ago now, we were at a conference, the Tribe 8 meetup, and there was a recurring theme I heard from a lot of sellers that were doing retail arbitrage was that they had made these really good relationships with the managers. And most people had these specific stores that they had routes to that they were always visiting. They really developed these relationships that were the difference of why they were able to get profitable inventory. And then in our own business, we've seen a dramatic change, I would say, in 2022 with some of our supplier relations, both in China and the US. I think this is something that all sellers, every model needs to be thinking about, looking at. Even if you don't like relationships, you need to figure out how to get better at them or how to bring the right people in on your team that can help with that. You've seen this line, Andy, you've been kind of preaching this for years, I would say. What's the latest that you've seen in our brand and for other sellers that are trying to get better inventory or get better service or make sure that their business is going to hum along the right way?
Yeah, so if you're doing retail arbitrage or you're doing private labeling like us, working with manufacturers in the USA as well as working with manufacturers overseas, I really think just in the past year, Nate, you and I have kind of dialed this in with our manufacturers, but I've heard it over and over again, probably since when I first started selling in 2013, that the way to get and acquire more inventory is to really build those relationships with those store managers if you're doing retail arbitrage. And so as I talked to other sellers, who were doing millions of dollars a year, they would over and over talk about these great relationships they have with the manager of the stores. And it's kind of a tightrope that you're walking a little bit, right? As you're feeling out that relationship. And I'm talking specifically here, retail arbitrage, and maybe even overall supplier relationships. But what's tricky about retail arbitrage is that manager knows that there is a line when they're working with bulk buyers a lot of times. Like we'll just take a Nike outlet store, for example. There are certain rules, right, that those managers are supposed to go by. And at times it changes, right, year over year. And so that relationship that you have to massage and manage, generally it's going to start out very gentle. And then as that manager begins to trust you, right, as you're coming in that store weekly, or some of the stores that we're going to be doing retail arbitrage and we'll be coming in there daily with our shoppers, you want to really kind of feel them out, and you always want to go by what they say. What I like to say is like, look, figure out what they like. Bring them cookies, give them a Starbucks gift card. Again, be careful because there are certain rules that they have to follow. But what that can lead to is when there is a sale coming up that hasn't been publicized, a lot of times sellers I know that have these relationships, that manager will call them up and they'll say, hey, just want to give you a heads up. On October 15th, we're doing a 60% off sale, which then again gives that team time to be able to organize so that they're right there, when that sale hits. Or, they may call them up and they say, hey, look, we have a ton of this overstock inventory. This is one seller I know. He gets a call like this every month. And not only in our store, but in these 3 other stores as well. I've talked to those managers. If you want to have it, this is the price that you're going to be able to get it. You're only able to have that kind of inventory acquisition if you have those kind of trusting relationships, right, with those managers.
And some of it's really simple. I mean, I heard people say over and over, like some of it's just common courtesy that they exercise when they're in the store. They're making sure that they're not leaving the area that they sourced in a mess. They're being courteous to the other shoppers and to the other employees, and building relationships, not just with the manager. Sometimes you have to start at the employee level of the floor level employee, who that's probably who you're going to see and talk to first. And then you kind of work your way up to the manager. And obviously at a store, everybody's kind of talking together and they start to know someone. So just some practical, almost obvious tips, but not always exercised by everyone because you're just in such a laser focused business mode. It's kind of like a war. You're going out to war at these stores sometimes, and you're ready to come in hot and just knock around all the other potential competition and the employees and the managers. And that's not what I've heard from these successful sellers that we talked to a couple of weeks ago. It was definitely much more of a long-term approach. They're not looking just for that day's profits. They're thinking about the next year, especially if this is a profitable close by store that they know they're going to be at every week or even every day, like you mentioned. So yeah, really important. I feel like we've heard this a long time, but now it's become almost essential. If you're not doing this in retail arbitrage, you might be able to get by, but you're probably leaving a lot of money on the table if you're not doing this. And some people are so good at this now. They're still everyday people. They're still quote unquote small sellers, but they're getting so good at this that they're probably going to kind of optimize and systematize and clean up because it's not just them, it's their shoppers now who are getting trained this same way. And that's what we're going to try to be doing with our shoppers. Like you said, we're going to be following these practices. So yeah, really interesting to see this development of the arbitrage game. And then, in our business, Andy, from a brand building perspective, you've worked with a sourcing agent overseas for pretty much since day one with your brand. I know there's a lot of question a lot of times if you're going to be doing private label importing. Do you use a sourcing agent? Do you not? Is it more expensive? Probably. But maybe just walk us through some of the benefits you've seen there and just tying back relationships. And I do want to hit the US suppliers because we now source probably 30 to 40% of our sales in 2022 will come from US supplied products. And to me, it's really basically like more like a wholesale relationship, I feel like at this point, even though it is our own brand, but very similar to even arbitrage wholesale people that are working with any local US suppliers. So what have you seen though, using agents and building those supplier relations?
Yeah, again, very similar. So we'll start with the international overseas first. So with the previous brand that I had that I sold 2 years ago, one of the keys to making that quality of that product better was when I visited China, went to the manufacturer, went along with my sourcing agent who I had a relationship with, and had dinner with this manufacturer, with the factory owner. It was actually the first time I've ever eaten chicken feet before. So that's something that they eat in Asia frequently. My first time eating it with them, I remember he said to me, like when I ate it, he was like, "You don't eat that in America, do you?" And I'm like, "Nah, we really don't." He said something like, "Well, it's funny because you'll eat everything, from a pig. You'll eat everything from the chicken, but you won't eat the feet, right?" And so he's a little bit, kind of making fun of me, like calling me a hypocrite, basically. Well, I just kind of laughed, but it was just all part of the relationship building. But out of that, I was able to get better terms with this manufacturer, as well as, so the product that I was selling at the time, it was a clothing product, and they had about 15 seamstress in their factory. And my sourcing agent, at the time, she would actually go in while they were making the product, and she would say, "Hey, look, I really feel like these two seamstress are the best, right? Like they take the most care. Let's ask the factory owner and say, hey, look, when you produce our product for us, can you please just have these two seamstress, making our product?" So he basically gave us two dedicated seamstress. That never would have happened had I not gone there, had I not had dinner with them, right? And so there are huge benefits, right, through that relationship building. And then I think about, our current brand, one of the ways that we've really been able to up the quality as well as up just the overall relationship is now we have a full-time person that works for us that builds the relationship with the factory owner that's working with the sales rep. And again, is in that factory on a daily basis when we can't be because of COVID. Really, you still can't travel to some countries in Asia. And so that's been super beneficial, super helpful. So at the end of the day, what I think my counsel is just always understand that you have to acquire, right, more profitable inventory. And the inventory that you are acquiring should always be getting better. And generally that only happens if you have great relationships, again, if you're doing retail arbitrage with those managers, or you are building up that relationship with that supplier.
And, for someone listening and saying, yeah, Andy, you were able to visit China. It's different. You were able to establish this relationship. You already kind of hit on it, but what would be your advice to someone who is looking to, and maybe it's not even China, maybe it's Vietnam, maybe it's Taiwan, maybe it's India, but it's not the US and it's not easy to visit
Yeah.
right now.
Yes.
What's your advice?
So a lot of times people think like trading companies are a bad thing, right? And we learned this from Steve Simonson, and that's not necessarily the case. Like trading companies, there are a lot of unique advantages that they can bring to your business because they are there, right, in the country. They have people that are there in the country. And so they can really act as your representative. So, once you find a trading company and you begin to work with them and you feel like the trust is there, my suggestion always is use them. And again, a lot of times they may work with, they may already work with a factory that you're working with. So they might be able to get a better discount. They understand how to negotiate 100 times better, than you or I. They understand the process. So, a lot of people think, well, man, if I use a trading company, it's going to cost me more money. And it may not in the end. It actually might cost you less, and they may save you a lot of headaches.
Yeah, it might be the time and the knowledge savings more than anything that makes the big difference. Let's talk about our U.S. supplier and how this has definitely been unique because we just started really in the last 2 years working with more U.S. people, and it is quite different, right? It's much more close to home, and you can communicate so much easier, obviously, and you can actually go and visit your supplier and have like a more personable relationship in a different way. What have you seen there, and what do you think has been helpful so far? And what would be your goals even with our suppliers kind of going forward? We haven't really talked about this a whole lot, so I guess we'll use this as a personal strategizing call ourselves. What do we need to do over the next year or two with these suppliers?
Yeah, so I think one of the really good things that we did earlier in this year, we hired a COO, and we realized, like you and I are kind of touching a lot of different areas in our business. We did see that there was an opportunity here with this supplier, but we felt like we were dropping the ball a little bit with the different product ideas that they were bringing up, and just the execution was lacking. So when we hired the COO, one of his main jobs was, hey, look, get with this supplier, meet with them. We want to be able to do more with the supplier. And that's what Steve has just been able to do an amazing job. Where you and I were communicating with the supplier maybe like once every 3 weeks, Steve came in and started having weekly phone calls with the supplier to shore up the relationship, but as well as to be able to see, hey, what are some of these other products that we might be able to execute on? And so, those calls, sometimes they'll go for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And now, the supplier, the communication has been so much better, but also now we have all these other potential products that are in the pipeline specifically because we have a dedicated person now talking to him on a weekly basis. So that to me was kind of the exciting thing that we did over the last 4 months.
You're getting the right supplier or getting the right, going back to the store manager. It's almost like adding a partner to your business. It's so much more than just a supplier. It's like a team member, a partner, because I mean, we've seen this supplier. We literally think the next phase of our growth of the business, the next 10, 20 million could come from this one supplier alone and how good they are. And I've heard that with a lot of people. We actually, Andy, have a product that we were looking at a few months ago that we thought was going to be a really good product. And we were going to get it from China, but the competitor we were looking at, or the potential competitor, actually had an exclusive arrangement with the supplier, and we just couldn't crack through and get it made. And that just shows you the value that seller had with their supplier, that they were able to maintain this exclusive relationship. When we tried every trick in the book, we were telling them, hey, we're going to be a better seller than this other person. We're going to give you more business. We're going to, look at our Amazon presence. We're better. And they didn't budge. And we kind of just had to give up on that product. And so it's frustrating in that sense, but it also reinforces to me why it's so important for us to have these good relationships, because the US supplier that you were just talking about, we now have some exclusive products with them. We are now going to have products that they will not sell to other people. So I'm looking forward to enjoying those exclusive on our end. And I just know that this is the difference maker for a lot of people, getting these partnerships, relationships, whatever you want to consider them, but they are important.
Yep, absolutely. So, at the end of the day, as you're growing your business, really the way that you move and growth is not only just acquiring that inventory. If you're a retail arbitrage, you're going in stores. The way that you really level up is when you begin to build those relationships, right, with those managers. That's where you're going to see a huge increase in that profitable inventory acquisition.
So we are looking forward to getting better at this. We are definitely still learning. We're still kind of in the early phases of these relationships and these partnerships. We think we're going to get better. We have plans to visit some of our US and eventually international suppliers as well. And so looking forward to bringing back to the show what we keep learning. And if you have specific tips, if you have stuff that you would like to know more about, specifically from an arbitrage or a brand building standpoint, how to get better, definitely reach out to us, send us an email, shoot out on social media, something you would like to hear there. And then make sure you become an insider. Every week, we're sending out a newsletter and tips on some of the best practices that we are doing in our business that we're seeing other $1 million successful arbitrage, private label, brand building sellers do. And you won't miss any of it if you go to amazingfreedom.com and you sign up to be an insider. Otherwise, make sure you keep listening to the show. We have a bunch of good interviews coming up on successful sellers who have done all kinds of different things, but at the end of the day, they're all finding success on Amazon, selling online e-commerce. And that's what we're going to keep talking about every single week. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Amazing Freedom Amazon Seller Podcast. See you guys.